Hello and welcome back to my channel What If Deku 2.0. Join us as we delve into the realms of fanfiction and fantasy, bringing you the best stories and discussions. Today we're kicking off part 1 of our series. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content in the future. The author of this story is 14alt from Archive of Our Own. All the relevant links are in the description. Feel free to say hello to the author on their profile. Now let's dive into the fanfic. How did it come to this? That question flashed through the mind of Izuku Midoriya as he crashed through the calm surface of the crystal blue water. His eyelids clamped shut reflexively as a chilling rush enveloped his entire body. He felt a thumping sensation as his back came in contact with the bottom of the pool, accompanied by the unpleasant sound of metal hitting concrete. The water surrounding him distorted Hillis's blaring warnings coming from somewhere below his neck. Armor integrity at 75%. Fractures detected in left radius and multiple ribs. The exoskeleton of his suit automatic began to compress anywhere he was injured. It braced his broken bones and kept his extremities from swelling. The red riot function had done an admirable job of saving his life, but he had still taken significant damage. He blinked his eyes open and stared up at the blurry images on the other side of the surface. Chunks of marble and debris small enough to float were bobbing up and down just a few inches from his face. He could make out an orange glow to his left, but the once blue sky above was stained a dark smoky gray. The light from the fires surrounding the pool refracted off the disrupted surface of the water, creating colorful prisms that danced across his vision. It would have been beautiful to look at had it not been for the war-torn scene on the other side of the ripples. Despite his current predicament, the smallest hint of a grin pulled at his lips. A bittersweet nostalgia filled his soul as memories from a decade ago flooded back to him. Is this how he felt on that rooftop when facing All for One? Will I be able to smile in the face of impossible odds too? The battered hero flexed the strained muscles in his core to sit up. The water wasn't much deeper than a children's swimming pool. Izuku remembered reading somewhere that it was only 30 inches deep in the middle, inches being the nonsensical unit of measurement they used in this country. The elongated body of water wasn't exactly made for swimming, but luckily, it had been enough to break his fall somewhat. He broke the surface and reached up to wipe the water from his face, sucking in a painful gasp of oxygen. With his ribs fractured, even the slightest movement was hell. He blinked his eyes clear and peered around, searching for any fellow heroes. The blood ran cold in his veins when he finally spotted one. Dynamite? He tried to activate his suit's thrusters, but they appeared to be waterlogged. A distressed growl escaped his throat as he scrambled to his feet and waded over to the edge of the pool. He quickly hopped out and barked a command to his suit's AI as he ran over to his greatest rival. Hillis. Ejecting water. Moisture was purged from the jets in his gauntlets and boots. Float functionality restored. The thrusters activated, allowing him to reach the prone form of Katsuki Bakugo much faster. Dinah. Kaken, are you all dash? Ugh. Quit yellin', you damn nerd. Izuku's oldest friend was lying on his stomach, doing everything he could to push himself up off the grass with shaky arms. Both of his grenade-like gauntlets had been completely destroyed, and the top half of his costume was torn to shreds. A tree had fallen just a few meters from where he lay. Its trunk was splintered nearly in two, a surefire sign that something had been sent flying through it. Where's Icy Hot? Katsuki scowled harshly, pausing to spit out a bit of blood as Izuku helped him to his feet. He got hit too. Izuku glanced around, looking for the bicolors of their friend's hair or the navy hues of his hero costume. It was difficult to see through all the smoke. Ironically, the colors he was searching for were in abundance all around them, but Shoto Todoroki was nowhere in sight. His emerald eyes couldn't help but fall on the large stone obelisk piercing the sky less than 30 meters from where he and Kaken had landed. 50 silver poles were erected in a circle surrounding the once proud structure. At the top of each pole flew a flag matching the red, white, and blue color scheme of the hero Shoto. The 170-meter-high monument standing at the center of the striped flags was in a state of utter disarray. Cracks were running like rivers up and down the bone-white marble. Chunks were gouged out on all four sides near the base. And, most noticeable of all, the top third, where the four sides were supposed to come to a point, was missing entirely. Holy shit. You went through that thing? And here I thought the tree sucked? If their situation hadn't been so dire, Izuku would have chuckled at his friend's poorly timed joke. We need to regroup with the others. Are you able to fly? The explosive hero gritted his teeth and managed a nod. Izuku could tell Kaken was in as much agony as he was. Unfortunately, they had gotten used to fighting through pain over the years. Let's go then. Izuku activated his thrusters once more and took off into the dark sky. He rose above the damaged monument and looked across the reflecting pool. On the other side, about 600 meters away, was another memorial to a former president of this fallen nation they found themselves in. There appeared to be a battle raging beneath the towering columns supporting the building. Quirks were clashing, fists were thrown, and weapons were swinging wildly. And just below the center column, Izuku could make out a silhouette that he recognized, locked into combat with an entire platoon of enemies. His heart plummeted to the soles of his shoes when he spotted the vibrant pink glow coming from her fingertips. Before he could send a command to Hillis. Before he could warn Kakin that he had spotted the other group. Before he could save her from being overwhelmed. Before his body even had a chance to move on its own. Boom. A thunderous rumble quaked through the ground below them. Izuku and Katsuki both spun around toward the source of the blast. They looked past the tall broken obelisk to see a massive explosion in the distance. Thick black smoke billowed up from a domed building about 3 kilometers away from where they were currently hovering. They felt the shockwave hit them just a few seconds later. A large hole had been blown through the roof of the Capitol building. Danger sense activated without a command being given. A green cowl manifested over the top half of Izuku's head. The dark goggles of the mask greatly enhanced his vision, allowing him to see 3 figures emerge from the breach. 2 of them were towering men, each standing well over 3 meters tall. The skin of their exposed torsos was as pale as snow, and their eyes held an unnatural purple glow. The figure in the middle was a man of average height wearing an armored suit that looked similar to Izuku's, but instead of a green and gold paint job, it was finished in a ghostly matte white. He seemed to lock eyes with Izuku, almost as if he could somehow see him from this far away. A thick black beard covered the lower half of his face, matching the long obsidian hair flowing from the top of his skull. The 2 ghoulish leviathans at his side leaped from the breach, and the bearded man soared into the sky. The 2 abominations were bounding between buildings, covering over 100 meters with every jump. The man in the armor had activated the thrusters in his boots to keep up with them, his violet eyes fixed on his target. An ivory helmet formed around his head as if readying for a death battle. They were heading straight for he and Kakin. At that moment, Izuku Midoriya made a split-second decision. There was no way he could ignore the virulent threats now hurtling toward them at startling speed. If Izuku rushed to the Lincoln Memorial and tried to help Ochako and the others, these monsters would inevitably reach them. Who knows how many heroes would die if that happened? He knew that he only had one option in this situation. Kakin. Go help the others across the reflecting pool? Katsuki whipped his head around to face him. Izuku was already pumping his limbs up and down in midair to store kinetic energy. What the hell are you? He's coming this way? He stopped charging the FA gene function and looked to his conflicted rival. We don't have much time. They're being overwhelmed. The other heroes at the memorial. Our friends need help. Are you nuts? You can't fight him, Al. I need to keep Lazarus from reaching the others. They won't just ignore me. I'm sure of it. His cowl lowered back to his tattered yellow cape, revealing emerald green eyes that were ablaze with determination. Please, Kakin. Katsuki gritted his teeth and shook his head in a show of protest, but he released an explosion and blasted toward the Lincoln Memorial all the same. Over the booming blasts crackling from his palms, Izuku could hear his oldest rival's hoarse voice thrown over his shoulder. Give him hell, Izuku. With that, he activated his thrusters and launched in the opposite direction. Izuku's watery eyes narrowed in on his ever-encroaching target. How far away, Hillis? 1,700 meters. 1650. Now 1,600. Ingenium. The thrusters in Izuku's boots increased their output to the maximum. He accelerated toward the U.S. Capitol building, keeping his eyes fixed on the villains getting closer and closer. Every ounce of common sense in his brain was telling him this was a stupid idea. The technological marvel he was wearing was already reduced to 3/4 of its defensive capabilities. He had broken bones and probably a concussion to go along with them. His odds of survival were almost certainly low. Hell, he could probably ask Hillis to calculate them for him. The chances of victory were slim. Izuku knew all that. He was on a collision course that would determine the fate of not only this country but every sovereign nation on the planet. He was against insurmountable odds, staring down a trio of opponents significantly more powerful than he was. His life was on a knife's edge. This may very well be the end of his story, but he still did not intend to lose. Izuku Midoriya tightened the muscles in his cheeks. He spread his lips so wide that the cool air rushing past his face slipped through the gaps in his teeth. An audacious, borderline psychotic laugh erupted from his throat just as he got close enough for his enemies to hear him. Smoke screen. Purple smoke was expelled from the vents of his armor moments before the two monsters and Izuku were set to clash. They zipped through the fuchsia smog, only to find nothing but air where the hero had once been. They crossed paths in midair and crashed into buildings on opposite sides of the street, having missed their target completely. The man flying behind them clapped his hands, clearing the smoke with the mere force from his palms slapping together. It took him a second too long to realize where his opponent had gone. Gear shift. The bearded man looked up just as the mesh gaps in Izuku's armor began glowing blue. The hero was high above him with two long black cables extended from his gloves to tall buildings on either side of the road. The cables withdrew, whipping him forward like a slingshot. The condensed particle accelerators lining his forearm launched his entire body downward at blinding speeds. At that same moment, the leftover kinetic energy stored in the titanium alloy within his armor was released in a bright flash of crimson. He had just enough time to ball his hand into a fist before his metallic knuckles connected with the villain's armored face, shattering his high-tech helmet to pieces. Overdrive Detroit smash. His opponent was sent crashing back down to the street below. The two wraith-like juggernauts who had missed their mark leaped back toward their downed master. The impact created a crater that cleared abandoned cars and sent chunks of earth flying in every direction. At the center of it, the villain glared up into the sky to see a legendary hero smiling down at him with a crazy look on his freckled face. "You're finished? You and the rest of the Paragon won't hurt anyone else. Do you know why?" Tears filled his green eyes as Izuku's emotions swelled. For whatever reason he was brought back in time to when he was just a kid. He had spent the first half of his life wondering why he was different than everyone else. All he wanted to do was help people, but everyone around him considered him ill-equipped to do so. Even his own mother doubted that he would ever be able to achieve his dream. But on that fateful spring afternoon, his life was changed forever. A chance encounter with a man who would become his mentor and father figure upended his norm and sent him down the path he had always wished for. And he remembered those 8 words that had turned his dream into a reality. "Young man, you too can become a hero." As the villains kicked off the ruined street and launched themselves back into the air, Izuku broadened his smile and readied his fist for another smash. "Because I am here." Act 1. The Tokyo skyline was lit up by the orange hues of the morning sun. An early breeze carried a warm sense of hope that tickled the skin on his forearms and face. Dawn had come and with it the promise of a new beginning. For Haruto Takakura, today was especially significant. From the moment he had rolled out of bed this morning, his heart had been beating a little faster than usual. A cocktail of excitement and nerves had been surging through his bloodstream ever since he put on his costume and donned the cowl his grandmother had handmade for him. He had endured 3 arduous years at UA. He had spent countless hours training. He had studied vigorously, filling up nearly 20 volumes of notebooks in the process. It wasn't easy, but today it would all be worth it. It was his very first day as a sidekick at the Todoroki Ida Hero Agency. His excitement was tempered ever so slightly when he accidentally stepped in a puddle left over from last night's summer storm. He hadn't known till that moment that his boots weren't waterproof. Hopefully that wasn't a bad omen. "You listenin', Slinky?" Haruto blinked out of his thoughts and refocused on where he currently was. He kicked his leg to shake the water off his boot and stepped into a jog to catch up with his mentor for the day. "Oh, alright. Sorry, Kido-senpai." The veteran hero turned to glance over his shoulder. His eyes were visible between the strips of cloth covering 90% of his head. Chuckle escaped from what Haruto assumed was his mouth beneath the fabric. "Just Kido is fine, kid. I'm a sidekick too after all." Haruto bowed apologetically and followed Kido down the street. It may have been early, but Marinucci was already bustling with life. People in suits and business attire were making their daily commutes into the large office buildings that rose from every block. "You're not just a sidekick though, sir. You're one of the flaming sidekickers and a pillar of the agency." This time rather than bow, the enthusiastic young man saluted. "I'm nowhere near your level. It's an honor to be learning from you today." Kido laughed, shaking his head humbly. "Sheesh, you're a bundle of energy, aren't you?" The rookie hero felt a bit of a blush on his ears. He waved shyly at some onlookers as they passed by a small cafe. "I beg your pardon, sir. I'm just eager to learn is all." "I'll bet." Kido sighed, bending down to sign an autograph for a young girl who had run up to them. She ignored Haruto completely. "I remember my first day. I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, same as you. But then I met the man who would become my boss." Haruto's periwinkle eyes widened in astonishment. You're talking about Endeavor, right? The former #1 hero? Correct. I was so excited. I thought he hired me based on my potential as a future pro. But it turns out the fiery old fart just wanted me for my quirk. I basically became a glorified air traffic controller for him. Kido chuckled dryly. His tone was more playfully nostalgic than bitter. Even though every day was literally trial by fire with him, I ended up learning a lot from the guy. Haruto felt his grin return as possibilities filled his brain. Endeavor hadn't been involved with their agency ever since it merged with Ingenium's a little under 2 years ago. It was now run by his former sidekick, Burnin, along with the 2 young heroes the agency was named for. Wow. That must have been so. He fell silent mid-sentence as his ears picked up a sound in the distance. Before his brain could even register that he was hearing police sirens, Kido was gesturing for him to follow. Let's go, kid. Haruto swallowed down his nerves and took off in a sprint behind his mentor. You all right? They rushed past civilians who were turning toward the source of the noise. Cars had stopped in the middle of the busy street to try and see what was happening. The blaring of sirens got louder and louder as the 2 heroes turned a corner. Sir. Do you think it could just be an ambulance or something? Kido shook his head and gave his earpiece a single tap to dial their agency. No. Police vehicles and ambulances have different sirens. Police cars use a higher pitch like the one we're hearing now. The call he had made connected, causing a voice to fill both of their ears. This is Tamashiro? Kid, what's going on in Marunouchi right now? We're on patrol and hear sirens? Haruto heard a muffled scoff in his earpiece. He knew that the intern who ran their agency's dispatch system didn't appreciate being called a kid. Looks like a hostage situation, sir. At Tokyo Station. Why weren't we notified? Another hero was already in the area. Won't they need a backup? Haruto asked naively, earning a chuckle from the high schooler on the other end of the call. I seriously doubt it. But why don't you go check it out, newbie? I know how much of a fanboy you are. Haruto's brow raised to his hairline. Surely he didn't mean. Tamashiro, need I remind you that you're an intern? Kido scolded his subordinate, shooting an apologetic frown over his shoulder to his shadow for the day. He pressed a hand over his ear. Don't pay him any mind. He's secretly as big of a fanboy as you are. Don't tell anyone I told you this, but he has a pretty hilarious nickname for the boss. Ever since Tamashiro was a kid, he's been calling him 5W. I can still hear you, old man. Putting your hand over your ear doesn't mute the microphone. The sound of gunfire less than a block away ended the irreverent exchange. Kido disconnected their call, and they continued toward the station. The world-famous red brick facade of Tokyo Station came into view less than a minute later. A full squad of cop cars lined the square around the Marunouchi side entrance. They had pulled up on the sidewalk, and their drivers had weapons drawn on the north exit ticket gate. Haruto and Kido finally arrived, taking up position behind the police perimeter. The rookie was staring at the door as if waiting for the most heinous villain in history to burst out of it. His heart was thumping madly in his chest. He tried to think back to the breathing exercises his grandma had taught him for when he had anxiety, but his memory seemed to be failing him at the moment. All his brain could focus on right now were those double doors. What should we do, sir? Suddenly a low rumbling could be heard coming from somewhere in the bowels of the station. Kido sighed to himself, dragging a hand over his face. Oh great. He's here too? Haruto spared a nervous glance in his mentor's direction. Kido didn't look alarmed in the slightest by the thundering noise. Actually, for some reason he looked slightly annoyed. If he causes as much property damage as last time, I swear to All Might I'll... Boom. 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 A cacophony of gradually louder explosions came from behind the double doors before a person was violently thrown through the glass. The masked villain tumbled across the square, skidding to a stop less than 5 meters from the police barricade. A group of officers quickly surrounded the downed man. His singed upper torso was smoking slightly, but he looked like he would live. Haruto glanced up from the defeated villain to see another sprinting out of the now-destroyed door. She was wearing a full suit of what looked like Kevlar body armor. The police aimed their weapons at her, shouting for the woman to freeze. She ignored them and kept running, trying to put as much distance between her and the hero in pursuit. Come on, man. Just let me go. It wasn't my idea. I'm just a hired AP shot. Haruto gasped loudly in excitement. He watched as a beam of bright orange light emitted from the derelict exit doors, hitting the woman right between her shoulder blades. The hero who fired it must have been holding back, because the armor-piercing shot special move he deployed had not lived up to its name. However, the blast had been concussive enough that the woman was knocked forward, somersaulting across the ground until she was lying prone beside her already detained comrade. The police subdued her just as quickly. Kido hummed to himself curiously. Honestly, not half bad. I half expected the whole station would need to be rebuilt. Haruto was about to try and get a closer look at the legendary hero behind the double doors when suddenly a third criminal burst from one of the windows on the second story. Shattered shards of glass were scattered along the square as the villain ascended into the sky using their bat-like wings. Onlookers and police officers alike gasped when they saw he was carrying a woman upside down by her ankles with his left hand. "Take one shot and I'll drop this beach." The villain howled down at the officers. Their captain held up his arms so her squad wouldn't do anything reckless. "Hold your fire." Kido cursed under his breath. "Damn it, he's getting away." Great explosion, whatever the hell your name is, get out here and... The veteran hero trailed off, looking to his left to see that the sidekick beside him was in a crouched position. "Takakura? What are you?" "Wait." Without warning, Haruto uncoiled the springs in his legs and launched himself into the sky at blurring speeds. He put his arms at his side to decrease drag and make himself more aerodynamic, just like his teachers had taught him. He could barely even hear the shouts of protest coming from Kido below him. His senses were overwhelmed by a sensation unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was as if some unseen force had coerced him to activate his quirk and shoot after the villain and their hostage. It was almost as if his body had moved on its own. Less than a second after he had taken off, he reached the Batman. He put out his arm and grabbed the woman, moving so quickly and with such force that he was able to rip her from the vile man's grasp. What the hell? The villain staggered but quickly regained altitude with a few flaps of their fleshy wings. He glared at the hero who had snatched away his hostage. "Who the hell are you?" Haruto had practiced the declaration for his grand introduction a million times in front of a mirror. He dreamed that everyone in Tokyo would remember the exciting debut of the hero named Slinky. But the sheer panic he was feeling kept the speech lodged in his throat. He and the woman had reached terminal velocity. He had her in his grasp. His wildly impromptu plan had been successful. If only he had figured out he was going to land ahead of time. Ah! The hostage and Haruto both screamed at the same time as they began to plummet back down to the ground. They were falling fast with nothing beneath them to cushion their blow. They're falling. Someone help them? None of the officers were able to react in time. And it didn't appear as though they had any quirks that would be able to help. This was it. This was the end. Quick. Do something. I may be able to change their trajectory at the last second. Stand back. Haruto felt like such a hopeless fool. Why the heck had he done that? He didn't need to interfere. His recklessness and inexperience would cost this poor woman her life. This is how the hero Slinky would be remembered forever. How embarrassing. Wait, is that? A bright flash of light glaring off the windshield of a police cruiser caused Haruto to close his eyes. A whirring sound filled his ears, getting louder and louder. And then, gotcha. Suddenly his momentum was halted as he felt himself stop falling. The woman in his grasp lurched downward, but his muscles had tensed so much that he held on to her. His eyes shot open and he looked up to see someone had caught him by the ankle. His jaw dropped comically when he met the kind emerald eyes and gallant smile of his absolute all-time favorite hero. The man's messy moss-green hair and long yellow cape rippled in the breeze. The suit of power armor he donned as a costume was lit up by a bright golden light between panels, almost as if it were alive. He wore a utility belt with pouches for various support equipment on either side of his hips. Thrusters in his boots and back along with the stabilizers in his forearms and knees allowed him to hover despite carrying the added weight of two adult people. The three of them slowly descended the remaining distance, and the hero gently lowered both Haruto and the hostage to the ground. The second his back touched the pavement, Haruto could vaguely hear the police and Kido behind him trying to scold him for being so foolish. Not that he was even remotely listening. His gaze was transfixed on his idol. "Are you both all right?" Haruto didn't answer. He couldn't. His mouth wasn't working right now. An onlooker somewhere off to the side shouted as they looked to the sky. "Hey, the villain's getting away. Like hell he is." More booms filled the square. Haruto assumed that was dynamite chasing after the bat villain. A faint shout and cheering from the police confirmed that the explosive hero had pursued and defeated the final thug. Excuse me? Are you injured at all?" Haruto blinked dumbly, finally realizing he had been staring a hole through the newly crowned #1 hero. His cheeks flushed with embarrassment. What the heck had just come out of his mouth? He cleared his throat and tried once more to articulate. Sorry. You're Deku? Good to see you? Kido came into view to shake the revered hero's hand. Deku's freckled cheeks pulled wide into a fond smile. Hey there, Kido. How have you been? Can't complain. Just happened to be on patrol in the area. He lowered his gaze to the rookie sidekick still sitting on the pavement. This careless newbie is with me. Sorry he got in your way. Deku's smile was replaced with a curious expression. In my way? What do you mean? He saved the hostage. Kido raised an eyebrow and nodded down to Haruto. He nearly got them both killed. I might have been able to change their trajectory at the last second, but it wouldn't have been easy. Deku shrugged his shoulders and turned his attention back to the young man on the ground. He separated them, which significantly improved her chances of survival. Not only that, but it looked to me as though he acted quick enough to catch the villain off guard. Haruto's eyes widened as he watched Deku reach a gloved hand down toward him. His smile returned, bringing a matching one to Haruto's face without him even knowing. Besides, a long time ago someone I look up to taught me that sometimes heroes are the ones who need saving. No man is an island. Right, hero? Izuku chuckled as Kido escorted the sobbing sidekick away from the crime scene. After helping him to his feet, the fledgling hero he now knew as Slinky had started bawling his eyes out, bowing in thanks for being saved by the coolest hero in history. Kido continued to scold him even while he went to apologize to the woman for putting her in danger. The poor kid was probably in for a lecture that, in Izuku's opinion, he didn't really deserve. But he supposed he had been a bit reckless to literally spring into action without any sort of plan. Not that he was one to judge in that department. As he bid the pair farewell with a wave and watched them continue their patrol, he couldn't help but wonder how the kid's quirk worked. He would have to ask Todoroki for a copy of his employee file later. He would normally ask Ida, but he probably would never allow such a breach of confidentiality. His best friend was uptight like that. The hell are you smirking about? Kaken had finished with the police report and had joined him to watch Kido and Slinky leave. Heard the Springy saved the girl but then almost got both their asses killed. What kind of moronic name is Slinky anyway? Izuku glanced around for eavesdroppers before letting out a sigh. You shouldn't talk like that in public, Dynamite. Your most recent approval ratings listed foul language as a detractor. Katsuki scoffed, shooting a glare at his partner. They can kiss my ass. The public doesn't pay my salary. Kaken were government employees. They literally do. Whatever. And who the hell are you to tell me how to act, number none? Kaken's palms crackled with explosions before he lofted himself up into the air. Izuku sighed again and activated his power armor's float functionality. The thrusters in his boots whirred to life, and he quickly caught up to his childhood friend and longtime rival. You went a little overboard on that villain. The one you sent through the doors of the station. The idiot had it coming. Kaken? Alright already? Get off my ass. Kaken veered away to put some distance between them, bringing a sad smile to Izuku's face. To anyone unfamiliar, Kaken's erratic behavior would have seemed normal. But Izuku knew him better than basically everyone except his parents and maybe Eijiro Kirishima. But lately he had been hard to reach and oddly quiet. He had dropped some weight, probably around 5 kilos or so by Izuku's best estimate. And he always looked so tired. Izuku often provoked him intentionally just to get him to fight back a little. Normally he would never kick the hornet's nest like that, but he found it an effective way to bring his friend out of a funk whenever he was having a particularly rough day. It had been like this for the past 4 months. They had both taken some time off after it happened. Hell, it felt like the whole world had frozen in time for a while, or at least Japan. It had been so hard on Deku, but at least he had people close to him to lean on. Despite having a plethora of friends who cared about him deeply, Kaken was kind of a loner. And he tended to put people at arm's length to try and hide from his insecurities, or in this case, his grief. How'd the suit hold up today? Izuku perked up at the unexpected question. Great. I was able to reach them in no time at all thanks to the particle accelerator added into the limbs. It's amazing how much it actually replicates what gearshift would feel like. He flexed his fingers, causing the thrusters to accelerate. When he relaxed his digits, the boosters in his soles decelerated back to cruising speed. He grinned to himself and turned to look at Kaken. I really can't thank you and everyone else, Ino. How many goddamn times do I gotta tell you to quit thanking us? It's been 2 whole years. The brusque blonde shot him an angry glower as he bounded through the sky. Izuku frowned, glancing down at his armor. The shift in weight caused his balance to falter a bit, but he quickly recovered. Even after almost 26 months with the suit, there were some things he was still getting used to. Yeah, well, I'm just grateful is all. The two heroes were quiet the rest of the way back to Kaken's agency. Izuku technically worked as an independent hero. Due to his teaching commitments, he had turned down any offers to join his former classmates' agencies. But his suit required extensive testing and diagnostics after sustained usage. Lightly Labs and UA's support department were both fairly far from Tokyo, and obviously I-Island wasn't a commutable option. He compromised by taking advantage of his friend's support division. Kaken, Kirishima, and Mina Ashido were technically in charge of the operation. Even though he wasn't officially a partner, a lot of the responsibilities had been given, or rather perhaps dumped, on Izuku anyway. Ashido had a particularly bad habit of delegating a good portion of her paperwork to him. But he didn't really mind doing monotonous tasks like incident reports. It was similar enough to grading papers back at UA, and it helped him stay sharp in between lesson plans. Upon landing, they were immediately greeted by the beehive-like hairstyle of the agency's head of public relations, Futo Nagashira. Their fellow UA alumni chewed out Kaken for his barbarity while Izuku went to the support department to have his armor analyzed. He did this after every 5 shifts or so. The power suit was easy enough to take off. Its scale-like robotic exterior could be removed modularly and automatically with a single command to Hillis, the armor's artificial intelligence. The pieces left his body like a swarm of butterflies only to reform inside and around the briefcase that housed it when its owner was off duty. The case could then be plugged into a computer so the techs could run a diagram. Finally, the results were reviewed by the R&D team before being sent off electronically to one of the suit's creators on the other side of the planet. The micro-machines peeled off his body like insects being shaken from a branch, revealing the black flight suit Izuku wore underneath his armor. He then took a seat, chatting politely with a tech while the diagnostic was done. Once his support item was given the all-clear, he was given the briefcase and sent on his way. He arrived in the locker room around the same time as Kaken seemed to be leaving. The prickly hero appeared to have showered and changed into street clothes while Izuku was tending to his armor. Everything go all right with Nagashira? An agitated huff was all he got in response. As he peeled off his flight suit, he watched out of the corner of his eye as Kaken packed up his costume. He turned to leave Izuku alone, but for some reason, he paused for a moment and glanced over his shoulder. Izuku. Izuku furrowed his brow and turned to face his oldest friend. Someone he would always consider a rival, but deep down he knew they were more like brothers than anything else. He was surprised by how quiet and melancholy his voice had sounded just now. "What's up, Kaken? You good?" He hadn't expected that at all. Was Kaken asking if he was injured or something? Was he trying to check on him? Izuku managed an oddly difficult smile and nodded his head. Yeah, I'm good." He so badly wanted to volley the same question right back to his friend, but he knew it would just sound patronizing. And he knew what the answer truly would be, even if Kaken happened to lie. "Haven't really talked about what's for dinner tonight yet. And we haven't hosted anyone since we moved into the new place." He almost laughed at the way Kaken's blonde eyebrow tilted in disgust. Like what he was about to ask was somehow the most unpleasant-sounding idea possible. "Would you want to come by and join us?" Kaken opened his mouth to reply, but he seemed to hesitate for a moment. It was as if he had some furious rebuke or clever joke on the tip of his tongue, only for it to evaporate like moisture on an arid day. Instead, he let out a sharp exhale through his nose and gave a curt shake of his head. "Nah. I already got plans or whatever." Izuku's heart sank a little at the lifeless response he had been given. It was so unlike the man he knew. "Gotcha. Next time then?" "Yeah, sure." With a half-hearted wave over his shoulder, Kaken grabbed his things and exited the locker room, leaving Izuku alone with his thoughts for a while as he got dressed in silence. The commute home from Kaken's agency wasn't too bad for Izuku. Despite the fact that his armor had flight capabilities, he still walked home every evening. On school days he had to take the Shinkansen every day from Tokyo to Mizutofu. He would use this time to take stock of the country and its citizens. Men, women, and children going about their daily lives. It warmed his heart when he saw that things were going well for everyone in Japan. That's why he enjoyed these little strolls. He found them therapeutic after a long day. Reports are coming in of another cyber attack in America. Once again, the religious extremist group who call themselves the Paragon are claiming responsibility. He looked up to see a pair of newscasters on a video billboard. We now go live to a press conference featuring the USA's #1 hero. A picture-in-picture popped up on the screen featuring a man with metallic wings standing behind a podium. The caption below said Maverick, along with the local time for New York City. At 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the United States Federal Reserve experienced a security breach. We have advised banks nationwide to temporarily disable their online platforms as an extra precaution. As of this moment, there is no reason to panic. Izuku's mossy brow furrowed at the man's tone. Even though he was asking his audience to be calm, the top hero was clearly on edge. The newscast cut back to the anchors and the camera zoomed out to reveal a panel. We'd like to welcome in the former number 1 hero, Best Jeanist, and the current number 4 hero, MT Lady, for their thoughts on the situation. Izuku grinned, always happy to see his old allies. Even though he had been retired for a few years now, Jeanist still made appearances on programs like this from time to time. And even though she had become quite the noble hero since her debut over a decade ago, MT Lady still relished the spotlight. While I admire Maverick's resolve and respect him for preaching poise, this is now the 6th time in the last quarter that these, let's call them what they are, terrorists have claimed responsibility. I believe the Paragon is a threat that must be stopped, like a frayed stitch that could create a devastating tear at any moment. So are you saying you think that Japan should get involved? One of the anchors asked. Jeanist took a moment before answering. If things continue to escalate, I believe so. I disagree with my old pal here, Lady interjected. It shouldn't be our job to police the world. If we allocate resources to help the Americans, who's to say that doesn't open us up to similar attacks? We could be putting a target on our own back. Izuku pondered each viewpoint as the two of them continued to respectfully debate on the billboard. While his stance on helping those who need it would always be firm, he understood the ramifications of getting involved in foreign affairs. Ever since the villain emergence rate started to decline around 11 years ago, the number of pros seemed to decrease as well. They were an endangered species these days. Their country simply didn't need as many heroes as it once did. Sending their already thin roster of powerful pros to provide foreign aid would make Japan vulnerable. Regardless of how he really felt about the situation, Izuku's first thought was to text his closest American friend to make sure she was all right. He sent a quick message to Melissa Shield and continued his walk home. Before he could take even 5 steps, another billboard caught his eye from across the street. It was a different news channel reporting on today's hero happenings. There were 2 clips playing side by side. One was spectator footage of him catching the rookie hero and the hostage, and the other was of the current number 9 hero saving a construction worker from a collapsed support beam. Onlookers behind him had stopped to watch the broadcast. They must not have recognized him because of the baseball hat he was wearing over his signature green hair. Uravity is so amazing. Deku. I totally ship them. What? No way. He has way more chemistry with Dynamite? Huh. You're delusional. They're more like brothers to me. Izuku covered his mouth and nose to muffle the snort. He continued down the street before anyone in the crowd recognized him and bombarded him with invasive questions about his personal life. When he took one last glance at the giant screen, he saw something that caused his heart to sink. A strange, inexplicable sadness fell over him like a soggy blanket. The image was zoomed in for a close-up shot of his face. His enlarged cheeks were pulled into a smile, but there was something so off about it. In the moment he didn't remember forcing a smile. And it's not like he didn't have reasons to be happy. He should be overjoyed. Every single day he gets to live out his dream and be the world's greatest hero. So why wasn't his smile as vibrant as All Might's used to be? Katsuki pushed open the door to the shop with his left hand and was immediately greeted by the florist behind the counter. Hello, dear. He grumbled out a hello and stepped up to the glass display. Arrangements of brightly colored flowers lined each shelf. Tulips, roses, morning glory, and chrysanthemums burst with vibrance like prismatic explosions. At least that's how they looked to him. Will it be the usual today? The shopkeeper asked him with a kind smile. Katsuki stuck his hands in his pockets and nodded. Yeah. He waited a few minutes while the florist prepared him a small bouquet. This shop was in the opposite direction of his apartment from the agency. Katsuki lived in Shinjuku, but his hero agency was on the other side of town in Harajuku. When he and his partners were deciding on a location, he had been apathetic to whatever they chose. They ultimately settled on Harajuku since Raccoon Eyes argued it was the most happening neighborhood in Tokyo, whatever the F that even means. In his eyes, it was just a lot of crepe stands, overpriced shops, and young kids who dressed like morons. He frequented this particular flower shop for a simple reason. It was easy for him to get off work, pick up a bouquet, hop on the Chiyoda line, and walk south to the cemetery in Minato. Once his usual order of red camellias was prepared, he paid the kind shopkeeper, thanked her with a small bow, and headed to the station. He white-knuckled his bad wrist the entire train ride, battling claustrophobia the whole time. Subways gave Katsuki unbelievable anxiety, but he couldn't risk ruining the flowers by flying. He practically ran through the station and up the exit stairs. The bursting saffron hues of the afternoon sun greeted him, and he turned south down a familiar street. Along the way he passed a park where a few kids were playing. They were pretending to be heroes. The one who was clearly the leader caught his attention with a boisterous impression that was unmistakable. "Don't you run from me, bad guys. I'll murder your asses. Taiki. Watch your language." Katsuki snorted as he watched the kids' parents scold him for cursing. The smallest amount of pride swelled in his chest. As much as he pretended like he didn't give a shit, he had always enjoyed the idea that one day kids might look up to him. The cemetery was just past the park. The stone shrines were arranged in neat rows that ascended up a gentle hill. It didn't take him long to navigate between the lines and find the grave he was searching for. Even though this particular shrine had only been here for 5 months, Katsuki had visited countless times. He frowned down at the grave, raising a champagne eyebrow in surprise. He had only ever found his own flowers resting at the foot of the stone. Not many people knew who was buried here, so it was pretty unexpected for him to find a bouquet of yellow sunflowers already lying beneath the wooden placard. Who the hell? He mumbled under his breath, glancing around as if whoever had left the sunflowers was still nearby. While they did look fresh, whoever had visited here was probably long gone. Was it Deku maybe? One of his old classmates? Wait, why did he care? It's not like this ritual or whatever was exclusive to him. Anything, it brought him some solace that he wasn't the only one thinking about the old man. He sighed, deciding it wasn't even worth questioning who had left the other flowers. He bent down and placed the bouquet of camellias at their side. He hummed approvingly, admiring how the red actually complemented the yellow and brown quite nicely. Even though he knew it sounded soft as shit, he had always liked sunflowers. They reminded him of the volatile explosions produced by his sweat glands. Was that a weird reason? Rather than standing back up from his crouch, he knelt down in front of the shrine. He didn't press his palms together to say a prayer. He didn't light any incense or any of that spiritual garbage. Instead, he just talked casually as if the man himself was right in front of him. "Hey." He waited a few seconds before he continued as if waiting for a response he knew would never come. "Saved a bunch of hostages downtown today. Well, Izuku saved them, but I dealt with the idiots." Katsuki sneered under his breath, but an amused chuckle bubbled up his throat. The two of them made an aggravatingly good team. Save to win and win to save. That's what their mentor had always said. The damned nerd is still number one even though he's still teaching full-time. He yaps all the time about how he doesn't deserve it. A small sigh escaped Katsuki as he frowned down at the stone. I can tell he's struggling even though he won't ever admit it. It's tough, you know? Well, I did back to number 4, but the public wouldn't know a good hero if it kicked them in the face. Icy Hot passed me, his jaw clenched. Again, so I'm number 7 right now. I'll get the spot back soon though and surpass Lemillion, Icy Hot, and even Deku in no time. It surprised even him how unsure he had just sounded. His once borderline delusional self-confidence wasn't at its highest these days. What the hell had happened to his tenacity? Had his resolve died too? The next words came out in a pathetic whimper. A quivering and feeble mumble crept up his throat that would have pissed off the person he was just a year ago. It pisses me up inside that I never got the top spot while you were still around. When I debuted at 4 but then plummeted to 15 cause of my bullshit approval rating, I didn't really care. But I would have been a little nicer to the extras if I knew how little time you really had left. Katsuki's scarlet eyes shined with remorse as he stared down at the name on the placard. His sensei's real first and last name was carved into the wood, along with a small inscription below written in hiragana. I am here. Always. He swallowed the lump in his throat and mustered a shaky grin. The tough old bastard always told him that the ones who are always smiling are the ones who are the strongest. But I haven't given up. I swear to you that I'll be the number 1 hero someday. I'll leave behind a legacy you would be proud of. He leaned forward and pressed his right palm flat against the stone. His bad right wrist bent in a way that caused him some discomfort, but he ignored it. Memories of their time spent together flashed across his mind, and echoes of advice and encouragement filled his ears from somewhere far away. Miss ya, old man. Hope you're resting easy. Izuku stepped out of the shower and quickly dried himself off. He wrapped a towel around his waist and went over to check his phone resting on the quartz vanity. Melissa hadn't texted him back, causing an uneasiness to form in his stomach. Should he maybe try calling her? He checked the time. It was pretty darn early in America still. So far, the Paragon's alleged crimes in the US have been limited to cyber warfare. What started as mundane DDoS attacks on social media servers had led to their most stunt, hacking into the US Federal Reserve. They were gradually growing bolder, and the magnitude of their crimes was only getting more serious. But he supposed losing your bank account was better than a violent terrorist attack. Melissa was probably fine, but he still couldn't shake this sense of dread churning in his gut. His lips twitched down into a frown. He continued to stare anxiously at his phone as he opened the bathroom door with his free hand. He was so distracted by the screen that he didn't even notice her right away. Hey! Izuku practically jumped out of his skin. He was so startled that he made an embarrassing yelping sound that caused her to giggle apologetically. Sorry? Didn't mean to surprise you. He clutched the doorknob, taking a few deep breaths to slow his hammering heart. He still wasn't used to having a roommate. An amused chuckle escaped him, and he mustered a coy smile that she quickly mirrored. And no worries. Didn't hear you get home. I was admittedly a little distracted. Her big auburn eyes filled with concern as she set down her duffel bag on their bed. What's the matter? Nothing. For whatever reason, he trailed off into silence. His brow knitted together as if he was trying to find the words. It should have been easy. He was worried about their American friend. But it felt like that wasn't the whole story. His cloudy thoughts cleared a little when he noticed she had taken a step towards him. He looked down to see her socks move one after the other until they were right in front of his bare toes. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end when she slowly wrapped her arms around him. Hey, I'm not totally dry. I don't care. You need a hug. He chuckled sadly and closed his eyes, flexing the muscles in his tired arms to return her warm embrace. The soft pads of her fingertips gliding over his bare back eased him tremendously. She raised onto her tiptoes to place a kiss on his jaw and whisper into his ear. Is it the stuff going on in the US? Are you worried about Melissa? He tried to pull back to look her in the eyes, but she wasn't releasing him anytime soon. His frown quirked up a little and he nodded against her forehead. I texted her but I didn't hear back yet. She's probably still sleeping. Isn't it super early there? Yeah. You're probably right. They held each other a little while longer in peaceful quiet. After a minute or so, his girlfriend let out a small hum. Saw you on a billboard? Same. How was your day? Good. You? Not bad. Planning is underway for the second tour. 4 more schools reached out to us today to say they were interested. That's wonderful. Yeah. And I stopped by a department store to grab Toru a present on the way home. Nice. Her party is next Friday, right? Mom. He heard a tired sigh come from under his chin. You hungry? I think we have enough stuff in the fridge to make curry. He widened his smile before finally pulling back from her embrace. Yeah. Why don't you hop in the bath and I'll get started with dinner. Then we can finish up and make dessert together once you're out. The grin that spread across her pink cheeks caused his heart to float into the clouds. Every time he saw that smile, it was like the seventh quirk had activated after 10 years of dormancy. Her eternal optimism made him feel like One for All had miraculously returned. Okay. That sounds fun. She raised onto her toes once more and leaned toward his face. His eyes closed as their lips met in a kiss that stole the breath from his lungs. She still had that effect on him after over a decade of friendship and 2 years spent together. He was so darn in love with Achiko Uraraka. Mel, hey Deku. Mel, I'm okay. Thanks for checking on us. Mel, love. Izuku exhaled dramatically, cracking a relieved smile as he typed up a response. Izuku, thank goodness. Izuku, Eve had a bad feeling ever since I saw the news tonight. Izuku, but I'm glad you and Tom are all right. He glanced at the picture frame resting on the dresser across the bedroom. It housed a photo of him and Achiko posing with Melissa and her husband at their wedding reception in California. Unfortunately, the last time he saw them both was under much more somber circumstances. Mel, we're fine but things are a little scary here. Mel, Eve been in contact with the DHS pretty much all night. Izuku, what's that? Mel, Department of Homeland Security. Mel, they can't seem to make any sense of the hack. Mel, it shouldn't have been so easy for them to get in. Mel, I'm starting to theorize that it could be someone's quirk. That concept had Izuku's mind racing. He reached over to his nightstand on his side of the bed. Inside the top drawer was his latest notebook. A pen was already clipped onto the front cover, ready to go at a moment's notice. As he was about to put its tip to the paper, he thought about what she had just texted him. He shook his head and set the notebook down. His theory crafting could wait. Izuku, if you feel uneasy, you guys are always more than welcome to come stay with us. Izuku, Achiko just set up the guest bedroom lol. Mel, I really appreciate that. Mel, but they need me and my team to run analysis in case it happens again. He frowned down at her last message, fighting off the urge to send a rebuttal. She could easily work remotely from a safer location, but he wasn't going to pressure her. He knew her well enough. She would probably see it as abandoning her homeland, something she would never do in a million years. Izuku, I understand. Izuku, our door is always open. Mel, I'll be fine. Deku. Don't worry about me. Mel, but thank you. Mel, when all this is over we'll take you up on that for sure. Mel, I want to see the new place. And I know Tom misses you all. Izuku, haha, I miss him too. Izuku, tell him I said hi. Mel, I will. Mel, give Achiko my love, okay? Izuku, of course. Keep us posted. Mel, I will. Did Melissa text you back? Achiko emerged from the master bathroom after completing her nightly routine. She was wearing a black tank top and a pair of loose-fitting women's gym shorts. That had been her preferred pajamas for as long as he had known her. Yeah. She and Tom are good. The security commission there has her company running analysis on the attacks. She took a seat on the edge of her side of the bed. The corner of his mouth twitched up as he watched her retrieve her sleep mittens from the other nightstand. When they first started dating, she had been too embarrassed to wear them when they stayed over at each other's places. But that quickly changed when they woke up to him floating above the bed the morning after their first night together. I'm glad they're okay. Does that put your mind at ease? His grin flattened, and he glanced down at his hero analysis notebook. To be honest, not really. I know Mel is capable and can look after herself, but... She glanced up from her mittens now that they were securely covering her hands and fingers. Were you taking notes? She flashed him a tender smile and climbed into bed beside him. I haven't seen you do that in a while. He set his notebook back on the nightstand so he could wrap his arms around her. She snuggled close, resting one of her mittened hands on his chest. I guess it has been a while. Mel was telling me that she thinks the hack may have been one of the Paragon's quirks at work. The whole thing gives me a really bad feeling. A contemplative quiet settled over the bedroom. Achiko would occasionally squirm against his side to get comfortable. From what she had told him over dinner, today had been a long one for her too. You sleepy? She nodded against his sternum and peered up to meet his eyes. Yeah, but... She sat up a little so she could get a better look at him. I can tell there's been a lot on your mind lately. I wanted to give you some time to process on your own. Ever since, well, you know. Her fingers wiggled so that the mitten on her right hand slid off. She reached up to gently cup his freckled cheek. We're a team, Deku. You can always talk to me, about anything. He stared at her for a few long moments. His hand rose to cover hers. She brought it back down to rest against the mattress, keeping her palm wrapped around his. Her soft pads traced his knuckles encouragingly, bringing his trepidations to the forefront of his mind. He had an uneasy feeling about the situation in the U.S. He was worried about Kaken's well-being. He was doubting himself and the impact he had on society as an undeserved number one. And he was carrying a tremendous amount of grief that he had yet to properly work through. But just like it had so many times in the past, her hand holding his was enough to soothe the pain. It was almost as though her quirk was activating passively in an attempt to lighten his burdens. A wave of comfort washed over him that reminded him of so many moments throughout his life, including a certain winter day during their third year of high school. Even 10 years later he could recall every detail. A smile manifested on his freckled face as the warm memory danced across his emerald eyes. He squeezed his wonderful partner's hand and turned his head so she could see his smile. You remember that snowy afternoon during our third year, when we walked to the station together? A hesitant smile curled over her lips. She was clever enough to know he was deflecting, but this was a day they hadn't reminisced about in some time. Of course. Her voice was light with nostalgia. Although I don't even remember getting to the station. Whenever I think back, all I can focus on is what happened at our spot. A wistful hum crept up his throat and he closed his eyes. He felt Achiko's fingers separate his own so that they could weave together. Deku? He heard her inhale a gentle breath. After the war we kept going above and beyond to reach out, even when people stopped asking for help. Japan has seen 11 years of relative peace ever since. And it was all thanks to you. I think that's something you should be more proud of. He tried to shake his head, to say that it wasn't just him who had saved their country, but her hand squeezed his palm as if preemptively silencing him. He chuckled under his breath, causing her to giggle. Even after saving the world, you're still that unsure hero in training I fell in love with. The middle schooler with the red shoes and mustard yellow backpack, tripping over his own 2 feet. I'd like to think my balance has improved since then. She giggled a little louder and craned her neck to place a kiss on the jagged scar under his right eye. His emotions crescendoed as gratitude swelled within his heart. Throughout his life, he had been blessed by people who supported him. He would cherish the connections he made through his time with One for All until he drew his final breath. A loving parent who worried for his well-being. A proud predecessor who made his dreams into a reality. Wise mentors who gave him advice when he needed it most. Loyal friends who shared his resolve and would keep running alongside him forever. It has improved. But if it ever falters, I promise I'll always be there to catch you if you fall. Far away across the Pacific Ocean. Alaska. A land of wilderness, gold mining, and desolation. It was the largest state in America by land mass, covering 665,384 square miles. Despite being almost 3 times the size of Texas, most of Alaska was uninhabitable to humans. The northern climate and untamable landscapes were far too harsh to support a large population, which made it a perfect place to conduct the first phase of their operation. Peter entered the large antechamber. His combat boots clicked and clacked against the marble floors. The ornate chandeliers hanging from the ceiling were currently dim, as if to symbolize the absence of the sun's blessing upon this northern land. It looked akin to some sort of old-world throne room. In reality, it likely was just that. The castle they set up their headquarters in had been a former Russian fort prior to being handed over to the U.S. in the late 19th century. However, the activity within the chamber was anything but archaic. Around 24 men and women sat at desks, analyzing data on monitors a few feet from their faces. Long rows of servers were housed on racks against the far wall of the vast room. He spotted Abigail hunched over, probably performing some sort of maintenance on the server farm with her quirk. The technomancer was wearing her signature gray coveralls with the top half undone and tied around her waist, leaving a simple black tank top as the only thing shrouding her feminine form. Her medium-length tangerine hair was done up in a ponytail. Peter had always thought she dressed rather unprofessionally, but he conceded that it did match her coquettish nature. She caught his eye and shot him a discreet smile. He was too aloof to return it with anything more than a short nod. Not while anyone else was around, anyway. He adjusted his square-rimmed glasses and walked over to Abigail. "Hey, you. Come to shower me with praise for this morning?" Peter ignored her braggadocious behavior. For a moment he thought she may be referring to something other than hacking the U.S. Federal Reserve. Something far more private. "Come on. The others are waiting." He pointed his thumb toward the door on their right. She pouted playfully like a spoiled child who had been denied her golden star. "Oh come on, Petey. I made you a billionaire today and you can't even give me a simple pat on the back? Don't call me that. Ugh. You're no fun." Abigail withdrew her abnormally long fingernails from various I/O ports on the server's motherboards. Her quirk retracted back into her fingers and she stood to join him. Peter would be lying if he wasn't put off every time he watched her do that. It was unsettling to say the least. "Are the other 3 back? I didn't see Silas or Esther return this afternoon." He spoke in a hushed voice to prevent any of their subordinates from eavesdropping. "Yeah. Esther flew in a few hours ago. And well, you know Silas. He gets a sick pleasure from popping in without warning." Abigail glanced around to make sure no one was within earshot of their conversation. "Creep." Peter nodded in agreement, causing her to smirk. "Maybe. But he's reliable. And Lazarus trusts him." "Yeah well." They reached the door, exchanging salutes with a guard standing watch. The tall man in military fatigues opened the door for them and gestured them inside without a word. They stepped into a much smaller room with significantly better lighting. Maps and intel lined the walls, and dossiers on high-ranking government officials lay open across an oval stone table resting in the room's center. A tall black woman with long braided hair was sitting at the table. She looked up to greet the new arrivals with a nod. Behind her, a thin man of average height with undercut dark blackish red hair was circling different points of interest on one of the maps with his back to them. His head turned, but he didn't quite glance over his shoulder. "Peter, Abigail. Silas?" Now that the 4 of them had gotten pleasantries out of the way, Abigail asked them the question that was also on Peter's mind. "Where's Lazarus?" Esther organized the files in her grasp by tapping their bottom edge against the table. "He's preparing. We need as many soldiers as we can for Phase 1. Peter had to bite back the scoff. He didn't hold himself to the highest moral standard, but even he took issue with addressing those things as soldiers. Take a seat. Silas addressed Peter and Abigail without turning to look at them. He should be arriving shortly. Abigail sat down in the chair across from Esther, crossing her arms over her chest. She blew a ginger hair out of her eyes and glanced at the dossier her compatriot had just set down. Is that the intel on the DHS's response? Did they cover this one up just like they? Once all 5 pillars are gathered, we can discuss any updates. Silas coolly interrupted her, continuing to select important locations on the map. He only stopped working to check the golden pocket watch hanging from a fob on his waistcoat. Abigail did a poor job of holding back her scowl, but a cautious look from Peter seemed to calm her down. Understood. They didn't need to wait long. Just a few seconds after Abigail's restrained response, the door to the chamber opened again. A man stepped through, clad in a white flight suit with its sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His violet eyes fell on each of the room's occupants. Silas finally turned around, addressing his ally with a sympathetic grin. You look exhausted. The man sighed, reaching up to run his hands over his long obsidian hair. His scruffy beard was matted and a bit unkempt. There were noticeable dark circles contrasting with the pale skin surrounding his amethyst eyes, a sign that he had overused his quirk. The man was clearly spent, but the 4 others in the room knew his resolve would never waver. They all had their own reasons for being here, but they were bound by a singular concept. They weren't brought together by friendship or some implicit sense of camaraderie. There was no honor or patriotism behind what they were planning. This was about one thing and one thing only: justice. Lazarus closed the door behind him and walked over to take his place at the head of the table. His authoritative tone rolled like thunder, deep and grave, lending credence to his title as the leader of their organization. Let's begin. Momo Yaoyorozu had been having a perfectly decent day until now. After her 5 a.m. workout, she brewed a new blend of seasonal matcha that she had picked up on her last trip to Kyoto. She had been getting into more ceremonial Japanese teas lately, and she had wanted to try this particular product for ages. It had been absolutely divine. Her shift had gone exceptionally well too. The agency she had founded was being featured in a new documentary about improving work-life balance amongst pro-heroes. The mental health and well-being of her employees were vital to her, and she was proud to be recognized for the positive impact she had on their industry. Then later, when she was on patrol, she got to team up with Uravity and Froppy to take down a gang of smugglers. Not only did she have excellent chemistry with them, but she always relished the opportunity to catch up with 2 of her very closest friends. She ended her workday with a meeting at Uravity's agency to discuss the next leg of their upcoming nationwide court counseling tour. Because of the efforts of her former classmate, millions of young girls and boys all across Japan would receive the guidance they needed. It had been one of the more fulfilling mornings of Momo's professional life, and her afternoon had been just as positive. But then reality came crashing down on her like a tidal wave in the form of a phone call from her mother. So, are you seeing anyone these days, dear? Momo sighed into the microphone loud enough so her mother was sure to hear. This again? Well, it's important, Momo. Mother, I haven't seen you since New Year's, and this is the first thing you wish to discuss? Your biological clock is tick. Mother? Momo hurriedly took the call off speakerphone, flushed with embarrassment as she passed a group of curious schoolchildren. That is entirely inappropriate and frankly quite vulgar. She whispered harshly into the phone. I have told you and Father over and over again that I am focused on my career at the moment. Dating, marriage, and children are the last things on my mind. Fine. We're just worried about you, sweetheart. Your father and I don't want your whole life to be devoted to your hero work. That's... Momo frowned at that, trying not to take offense. It hurt that her own mother wasn't recognizing all the hard work she had put in over the past decade. Graduating at the top of her class at UA, starting her own agency, and nearly cracking the top 10 in the latest Hero Billboard chart, apparently none of those things mattered. She swallowed her bitterness and took a moment to digest her mother's concern. If she was being honest with herself, she had become a bit engrossed with her job lately. It was a little ironic that her agency had been chosen for a documentary on work-life balance when she admittedly didn't have much of a life outside of work. There's more to life than just finding companionship, Mother. That's an antiquated mindset. I feel very fulfilled with what I do now. While we're on the topic, do you remember Kaido Shinomiya? She rolled her eyes. It was glaringly obvious where her stubborn mother was going with this. Not particularly. Are you even listening to me? You're being? You used to have playdates with him when you were little. He was always such a sweet boy, and he comes from an exceptional family. An exceptional family. There it was. Anyway, he's the chief financial officer for a highly successful support company. He's relocating to Tokyo from Osaka next month to start up a new branch. Momo raised an eyebrow at that. No part of her was keen on pursuing a childhood friend romantically, especially one who she didn't even remember. But she considered it could be a potentially useful connection. Her frown deepened. It bothered her that her first instinct was to default to a business relationship. And she had referred to Kaido as it in her head. Perhaps her mother had a point. While I prefer that my own parents didn't set me up on a blind date, can I think about it? Of course. No pressure, dear. Momo could have scoffed. This entire call was just that, pressure. I'm about to get on the train. I may lose service. Understood. It's been lovely catching up with you, Momo. Let me know about Kaido. Okay. You too, mother. Say hello to father for me. The moment she hung up the phone, a long exhale escaped her lips. She made her way through the station and arrived on the platform just as the Ginza line arrived. She took a seat in the corner of the train car, forcing a polite smile and wave for a young fan who recognized her. She once again pondered her lack of a life outside of hero work. When she was young, she would go on trips with her family a few times a year to exotic locales around the world, but the last time she had taken a vacation was over 3 years ago. She saw her friends occasionally, but it was often limited to business meetings or out in the field. Kyoka and Denki were the exceptions though. They were her best friends and her sanity. She was grateful that they asked her to hang out often, and they rarely discussed work whenever they did. They never made it seem like she was being a third wheel, even though she couldn't help but feel that way sometimes. The two of them claimed that there was nothing romantic between them, but Momo was no fool. Both Kyoka and Denki had confided in her regarding their feelings for the other a long time ago. Whether or not they had actually acted on those feelings yet was their business, so Momo didn't pry. Uraraka had also taken the initiative to reach out to her more often. Momo knew from more private conversations between the two of them that the Gravity Hero was making a conscious effort to try and make time for her personal life, including spending time with those closest to her. This change in mindset began a few years ago, ever since she and Midoriya had officially started dating. Looking back, a small part of Momo regretted not being more interested in relationships while in school. Despite going to a co-ed boarding school and living with 14 boys for 3 years, her focus had solely been on training to be a pro hero. Had her lack of experience with the opposite gender during her formative years stunted her love life in adulthood? It was embarrassing that even at 26 years old, she had never been on a proper date. She had been asked out a few times and basically had her own fan club back in high school, but she had turned down any chances at romance. There had really only been one boy who ever caught her eye, but she had always chalked it up to admiration as opposed to physical attraction. Her interest in him was purely based on the fact that he was the most capable boy in her homeroom class. It wasn't because he also happened to be objectively very handsome. She dismissed the silly thoughts with a shake of her head. Stressing over this topic was a pointless exercise and a waste of her time. Besides, her mother's point that she needed to hurry was ridiculous. She was a perfectly healthy 26-year-old. Her reproductive window was far from closed. She disembarked from the train once it arrived at Ginza Station. Her favorite part about living in this neighborhood was the abundance of patisseries. They made for excellent spots for her to quickly replenish her lipids after a long day's work. She stopped at her favorite one just across the street from her building. After grabbing her usual order, she headed home. As soon as she opened the door, she was greeted by her cat, Tadeo. He brushed against her leg while she removed her shoes, purring merrily when she crouched down to pet under his chin. Why would I look for romance when I already have the perfect man to come home to? Rather than laugh at her joke, the British Shorthair just tilted its head in indifference. She sighed, realizing she sort of sounded like a crazy cat lady. After making sure Tadeo had food and water in his bowls, she began her evening routine. Her master bathroom was equipped with an automatic filling tub and heated floors. While it was getting ready, she unpacked her bag down to the last item, stowing various keys, drives, folders, and reports away in the home she had designated for each of them. She hung her dirted costume in the entryway so that it would be ready to go when the dry cleaning company arrived to pick it up tomorrow morning. After a cleansing bath, she dressed in a cozy set of wool loungewear and applied her skincare regimen with a precision that would make a cosmologist proud. She retrieved a clean costume from her closet for tomorrow's shift before heading into her kitchen. While a kettle was heating on her stovetop, she measured out exactly 10 grams of her favorite loose-leaf herbal tea. After brewing a particularly exceptional cup, She went into her office and started the task she did each evening after work, reviewing every report filed by her agency's heroes that day. Tadeo took up residence in his sustainably sourced cat cave in the corner of the room. Momo muttered to herself as if debriefing her pet on current events. Sources close to government officials speculate that the DHS may be covering up hacked wire transfers from the Federal Reserve. She frowned down at the classified intel displayed on her tablet. Why would they try to minimize the breach? Out of embarrassment, maybe? Are they really that egotistical? She pondered what reasons the US government could possibly have for downplaying the severity of the recent cyber attack. Their initial statement had claimed that an insignificant amount of money had been transferred. If that was, as these rumors suggested, a lie. Bzzzzz. Before her theories could get too far, her phone vibrated from its place on her desk. She thought about ignoring it, but a quick glance at the notification on the screen got her attention. She quickly picked up the device and opened the text. Kyoka, you are coming to Toru's birthday party tomorrow, right? Momo pushed her lips to the side. She actually had forgotten that the event was even tomorrow. Off the top of her head, she knew she had several post-patrol meetings scheduled for late in the afternoon tomorrow. She typed up her go-to-flaky response for situations like this one. Momo, I have prior engagements tomorrow afternoon, but I will try my hardest to stop by. A separate message came in less than 10 seconds later. Denki, come out tomorrow, laughing face. She glared down at the screen and added them both to a group text. Momo, it's infuriating when the two of you gang up on me like this. Denki, we weren't trying to. Kyoka, yeah. We just wanted to see if you wanted to roll with us. Denki, we miss you, Yamamoto. Come on, it'll be fun. Another private text came in from her best friend. Kyoka, sorry, uneasy face. Kyoka, I'm just trying to look out for you. Been a while since you came out with everyone. Her raven brow furrowed. Had it really been that long since she attended a social gathering with the former members of Class A? Excuses ran through her mind like a flowing river. There wouldn't be much time for her to get ready after her meeting. She didn't have anything to wear. And she usually washed her linens and cleaned her bedroom on Friday evenings. Wait, why was she concerned with such mundane things? She had become so ingrained in her weekly routines that she was preemptively thinking of reasons she couldn't go. Had she become that much of an introvert? She shook her head as if to dismiss her own rude behavior. She was being obtuse. Toru was a dear friend, and it would be incredibly impolite of her to skip out on her party. Plus, she honest to goodness did miss each and every one of her old friends. With her mother's comments from earlier still bouncing around in her mind, Momo picked up her phone and quickly typed up a text. Momo, I appreciate you, Kyoka love. Momo, if it wouldn't be a bother, I'd love to go with you and Denki tomorrow night. Kyoka, you are never a bother. Kyoka, we'll pick you up at 6, smiley face. Momo released a shaky exhale like she was blowing out a candle. A part of her was looking forward to the party. She knew it would be a fun time, and that there was nothing to worry about. But another part of her couldn't help but feel slightly anxious, even though she had no idea why. The next day. Come on, bro. I really need your help here. Sorry, man. I gotta pass. Ijiro chuckled at the way Hantashiro craned his neck to shoot him a glare over the large cardboard box. They were each carrying a crate filled with streamers, bunting, signs, silly hats, and other decorations for the party. Shiro was one of the few among them who had a car, so he had agreed to bring the decorations ordered by the party planner. Why did he even have a car when his quirk allowed him to swing from building to building? Ijiro had absolutely no idea. Bakugo had wheels too, but he rarely drove to work. He always said he had personal shit to do after he was done for the day. Can't believe you're leaving me hanging like this, Not very manly. Dude, really? Ijiro deadpanned at his friend for using his own trademark against him. Look, I'm just not super interested in dating right now. And a blind double date just isn't my thing. Shiro groaned and hung his head. His feet shuffled along pathetically, making Ijiro feel just a tad guilty for declining. Just last week, Shiro had gone through a pretty sudden breakup. To be more precise, his girlfriend of 6 months had decided to dump him for another hero. Why don't you ask someone else? A lot of our single friends are gonna be here tonight. Ijiro suggested, hoping to inject some positivity into his sullen friend. Shiro perked up a little. Like who? Kaminari? Shiro scoffed. Please. We all know he's taken. Ijiro channeled all of his brain power into finding a scapegoat. I think Tokoyami is already there to help decorate. Pretty sure he's single? Shiro considered it for a moment before shaking his head. They rounded a street corner, bringing the venue for the party into view. The izakaya wasn't too far from where they had parked. I love the guy, but don't you think he would be kind of a bummer on a double date? Ijiro chuckled, shrugging his shoulders but not offering protest. He knew Tokoyami could be one hell of a time, but he was getting a little worn out by this conversation. What about Todoroki then? He should be here later. Shiro scoffed harshly. And risk both girls going home with him? No thanks. Bakugo? Dude, be serious? Ijiro was relieved when they finally reached the izakaya. He effortlessly palmed the box with one hand so that he could open the door for his companion. Shiro thanked him with a head nod and shuffled his way past him. Yo, did you hear about all that crazy stuff going on in the US right now? Ijiro followed him down the hall and hit the call button for the elevator. Yeah. Sounds like things are getting kinda tense. What's your take on it? Shiro stepped into the elevator and set down the box so he could give his arms a bit of a break. Not sure really. It seems like every other day there's new intel coming and that contradicts whatever came before. Ijiro nodded in agreement. That's pretty much what Midoriya said too. He's stuck in a tough spot with Melissa being there and all. Shiro picked the box back up and frowned down at its contents. Yeah. We're all worried about her, but I can't even imagine how he feels. She's done a lot for him. A familiar hostess was there to greet them the moment the elevator doors reopened. This izakaya wasn't known for being super busy, but that was sort of the idea. It was tricky for a few dozen of the nation's top heroes to gather without being swarmed by fans or the press. This place had sort of become their go-to for social gatherings, holidays, and celebrations. They were led to the back of the pub and through a curtain to reveal a private room with a separate bar. Ijiro grinned when he saw the others had already arrived. Good evening, Shiro. Good evening. Kirishima. Gentlemen. Hey. How've you been? Ribbit? Yeah. Now we can get started. Tenya Ida, Fumikage Tokoyami, Tsuyu Azui, and Achiko Uraraka stood from one of the tables to greet them with firm handshakes and warm hugs. Ijiro spotted a flash of pink over Achiko's shoulder. When he pulled back from her hug, he turned to meet an all-too-familiar grin below a set of otherworldly yellow and black eyes. Hiya, boys. Mina was behind the bar, connecting her phone to the speakers mounted above it. She wore a sleek sleeveless black bodycon dress that showed off her toned arms and hourglass shape. Her curly pink hair was styled much longer than when they were in high school, now falling over her bare pink shoulders. She set down her phone and hurried over to wrap her arms around him. Thanks for bringing the decorations. Yet sure, horn buddy. She beamed up at Ijiro before turning to hug Shiro. Her eyes softened, and her smile filled with pity she didn't even come close to hiding. How ya holdin' up? Shiro groaned, resting his chin on Mina's shoulder while she patted his back lovingly. Damn it. How'd you find out? Sweetie, come on. Mama's got eyes and ears everywhere. He sighed, glancing over to the others to see they thankfully weren't paying attention. I'm Hanjin in there. His voice was shaky like he was about to start crying. I really thought she was the one, you know? Mina whimpered, raising her hand to run it over the back of his black hair. Ijiro had to bite back a chuckle at the melodramatic pair. She's bats hit crazy. You're such a catch. You'll be fine, my dude. Yeah, you're right. Thanks, Mean. Want me to set you up with one of the single ladies at my agency? He pulled back from the hug and the corner of his mustached lips twitched up a bit. I already have a double date lined up next week, so fingers crossed. He turned to give Ijiro a hopeful look. The forehead head glanced back and forth between his two friends. Mina had raised a curious pink eyebrow in his direction. It was evident she had picked up on Shiro's implication right away, but she didn't appear to acknowledge it. Gotcha. Sounds fun. Before Ijiro could clarify that he had already turned down the double date, more guests arrived. Mina clapped her hands excitedly and rushed over to practically tackle Shota Aizawa with a teary hug. Oh my god. I can't believe you came, sensei. Eri giggled from her spot beside them as her guardian tried to hold back his former student. Ijiro laughed at the whole scene unfolding. He made a conscious decision not to overthink the little silent exchange that had just happened between him and his oldest friend. There was no reason for him to stress over it. Even if he had agreed to go on the double date, it's not like he would be breaking some sort of rule. He took a sharp breath to settle his nerves before going over to greet their old teacher. Happy birthday. Momo watched the headless clothes of her former classmate jump back through the doorway in surprise. She turned around, laughing into her boyfriend's chest as he patted her back lovingly. When she turned again to wave excitedly to all of them, it was clear as day that the invisible girl was smiling. Momo stepped into the long line to greet the birthday girl and her longtime partner. When she reached the front, she gave both Toru Hagakure and Masahiro Ojiro a warm hug and the cheeriest smile she could muster. They exchanged brief pleasantries before Momo awkwardly stepped aside to cede to the next person in line. She took a sharp breath and, despite her better judgment, went over to the bar to get a cocktail. Ever since she had arrived with Kyoka and Denki, she had been feeling a sharp pang of anxiety that she did her best to put aside. In an effort to curb it, she had ordered a glass of white wine to try and calm her nerves. Normally, their group would abstain from drinking whenever they went out, just in case duty called. But as the years ticked by, nights in the city became more and more incident-free. In the past few months, they started assigning a few of them at random to be the designated hero. Tonight it was Shinso's, Tsu's and Midoriya's turn. The Riesling turned into a sangria at Mina's suggestion, and the sangria then turned into an espresso martini as Momo caught up with Rikido Sato. She and the sweets hero had bonded over the years due to their shared dependence on food for their quirks to function. Sato had even taught her some recipes during their time together in the dorms. "Goodness, I cannot believe it's been 3 years since you opened the bakery. Congratulations." Sato's thicker-than-average lips pulled into a proud grin. "Thanks. Sometimes I can't believe it either." He held up his own sugary libation to offer her a cheers. "I'm lucky though. Wouldn't be able to handle it alone." Momo felt her left eye twitch, but she was able to maintain her smile. "Is Kanna well?" "Oh yeah, she's great. Basically runs the place." Sato had been in a relationship with a fellow baker named Kanna for about 4 years now. Together they had opened a small bakery adjacent to Wash's agency in Kagurazaka. "That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you, Sato." Momo could feel her cheeks begin to strain. She was obviously thrilled that her old friend was doing so well, but hearing about his blissful relationship reminded her of the conversation she had with her mother earlier. Before Sato could ask her if she was seeing anyone, Mina whisked him away so they could prepare the cake he had made for Toru. Momo giggled, waving goodbye as the pink girl effortlessly pulled the much larger man over to the coolers behind the bar. A relieved exhale escaped her windpipe, knowing full well the interruption had saved her from having to explain she was single for the 3rd time this evening. She found it a little odd that such a question was even socially acceptable. Why was one's relationship status the default inquiry when catching up with an old friend you haven't seen in a while? What an annoying social norm. She picked her martini up off the high-top table, surveying the dimly lit room as she took a long sip. Toru was chatting with Tsu, Tokoyami, and Shoji while Ojiro and Shinso were playing darts in the corner with some spectators gathered around. Shiro was sitting at the bar, pitching something to Bakugo that seemingly had him annoyed that not that annoyance was anything out of the ordinary for the number 7 hero. Kirishima was on Bakugo's other side, apparently amused by the whole conversation. Momo's dark eyes narrowed on a group seated at one of the tables. An animated Denki had the attention of Midoriya, Achiko, and Kyoka as he recalled some story that couldn't quite be heard over all the noise. Kyoka rolled her eyes at her definitely not boyfriend before catching Momo's gaze. She gave Momo a strange look as if wordlessly asking her why she was standing by herself, before waving her over to join them. Momo inhaled sharply through her nose, finished her drink, ordered a refill at the bar, and marched over to the table to mingle with her friends. She primarily listened while the others discussed various projects they were working on or trips they had taken recently. Mina came over to join them now that the cake was all set. They were waiting for a few more guests to arrive before they were ready to sing happy birthday to Toru. Their extroverted hostess quickly commandeered the conversation, shifting the topic to her favorite pastime. "So, when are you cinnamon rolls gonna tie the knot?" Geez, Mina." Achiko rolled her eyes, but her perpetually pink cheeks appeared to darken a bit. Mina had been teasing Midoriya and Achiko since they were 15. Momo had often found her antics a little intrusive, but she knew her eccentric friend meant well. "We haven't even went public with our relationship yet." "Why yeah." Denki blew a raspberry. "Come on guys. It's not exactly a secret. I swear I see a new post about you guys every other day on social media." Kyoka gently poked his cheek with one of her jacks. "You really gotta stop following all those gossip accounts." "Why? It's fun to read about myself." Denki shrugged, grinning around the table as the others chuckled. "Makes me feel like a big shot." "You actually read the ones about you?" Achiko asked curiously. "Isn't that weird?" Denki shrugged nonchalantly while swirling the beer in his glass. "Not all of them are flattering, but for the most part it's just stuff about me and Kyoka." Kyoka let out an uncomfortable laugh that seemed all too forced while the others considered Denki's point. "Have you guys seriously never ego-surfed before?" Mina looked around the table, frowning at all the shaking heads. Sheesh, you guys make me feel like some kinda self-obsessed diva? Well? Mina shot a glare at Denki while the others laughed. She shrugged her shoulders and took a swig of her Cosmo. Excuse me for wanting to make sure no one is spreading lies about me on the internet. You have Nagashira for that though, Midoriya countered. He should be able to shut down any rumors before they snowball. Momo recognized the name of another fellow UA alumni. Nagashira was the business course student who had recorded stretches of the final battle against the League of Villains. They had actually been in the same location during the first phase of the fighting while Shigaraki was trapped in the coffin in the sky. He now worked as the head of PR for the agency Mina represented. Yeah, but he can't handle everything himself. There's still plenty of stuff out there. Just the other day I saw some crap about me spending my nights with... Mina trailed off when she noticed something over Momo's shoulder. Her unique eyes lit up, and a huge smile spread across her pastel-pink face. Roki, you made it? Momo's head whipped around so fast that her ponytail smacked the back of Denki's head. Yamamo, careful with that thing. She completely ignored Denki's complaint, staring into heterochromatic irises she felt like she hadn't seen in ages. Maybe it was the alcohol, but he somehow looked taller than she remembered. The near-decade gap since their time together in high school had granted his features a certain well-formed symmetry. The split red and white locks on his head were around the same length as back then, but now with attention paid to their styling that was clearly someone else's doing. Above a paper-thin smile were a pair of eyes she swore were honed in on hers. The turquoise blue left was intense like a raging ocean, while the gunmetal gray was calm like the winter sky. An eerie, but not entirely unpleasant, shiver ran down her spine when his willowy grin curled slightly higher. For some reason, it warmed her soul to see him smile. He finally looked away when Mina and Toru rushed over to hug him tightly. He visibly tensed with an awkwardness that was unbecoming of the number 3 hero but was wonderfully adorable on Momo's icy former classmate, fellow recommendation student and friend, Shoto Todoroki. Shoto was admittedly rather inexperienced with hugs. Growing up in the house he had, they weren't exactly a regular occurrence. He found that as he got older, it became more and more expected of him to greet his old classmates with hugs rather than handshakes or a simple grin. It wasn't that he minded the physical contact, but he certainly didn't get much out of it. In fact, he didn't really have an opinion on the act of hugging itself. But the gesture did make him feel accepted by them as a valued alumni of Class A, and he cherished them for that. When Ishido and Hagakure finally released him from their dual embrace, he returned waves and head nods he was getting from his peers around the room. After absorbing Tsu's kind smile, Kirishima's sharp grin, and Bakugo's annoyed glower, his eyes fell on the table once more. Before he even realized what was happening, Ishido handed him a beer that she had seemingly pulled out of thin air and led him over to say hello to the others. Shoto's green-haired best friend walked around to offer him a firm handshake while Uraraka hugged him warmly. Kaminari and Jiro both gave him fist bumps from their seats. The last person sitting at the table stood politely to greet him. Hello, Todoroki. It's wonderful to see you. The flawless skin on either side of her small nose was highlighted with rosacea, probably from the beverage she was drinking. Her onyx eyes held a subtle insecurity that he had seen too many times over the years. He had become adept at recognizing it ever since they had teamed up during their first-year final exams. He never understood how someone so brilliant and so proven could ever be unsure of themselves. Nice to see you too, Yaoyorozu. Rather than hug him like the others, she gifted him a slightly off-balanced formal bow. He returned it with a grin and nodded to the empty seat beside her. Mind if I join you guys? She nodded eagerly, and her shyness evaporated into a tender smile. Please? Shoto slid onto the bench beside Yaoyorozu and set his mug on a coaster. Midoriya passed a basket of assorted tempura down the table. Shoto chose a fried asparagus stalk before sliding the basket in front of his fellow recommendation student. She tucked a stray raven hair behind her ear and reached for a sweet potato. Thank you. How you been, my dude? Denki asked as he reached across Yaoyorozu for a piece of zucchini. Shoto swallowed down the breaded snack and answered evenly. Not bad. How are all of you? He settled into the conversation well enough. Midoriya told him about the newest batch of first years at UA. He described all 40 of the hero course's students' quirks in detail, even the ones who weren't in his homeroom class. Shoto smiled at his friend's seemingly endless passion for teaching. He truly was born for it. Uraraka thanked him for helping out with the second leg of her upcoming tour. Since his agency merged with Ida's a few years back, they had become heavily involved in court counseling reform. He remembered the day Uraraka had pitched the idea to the two of them. His thoughts couldn't help but drift to his departed older brother. A program such as hers could have potentially helped kids like Toya. Shoto accepted her proposal immediately. When Jiro brought up something that happened during her patrol today, an annoyed Ishido created a rule that whoever talked about work had to take a drink. While the others discussed ongoings in their personal lives, he noticed the woman beside him was oddly quiet and maybe a bit stiffer than usual. Her expression held a fond smile that he was all too familiar with, but there was a hint of unexpected sadness behind her obsidian eyes. In his younger days, he would have obtrusively asked her if she was feeling under the weather. He remembered once trying to console her by crassly recommending pressure points that might relieve her distress rather than actually trying to understand her better. What a fool he had been back then. Luckily, he had matured since then and he had his time with Class A to thank for that. Any other group of random strangers would have left a chilly and unbalanced young man like him behind. But not Izuku Midoriya. Not Tenya Ida. Not Momo Yaoyorozu. None of them had strayed from his side. He stole another glance at her out of his peripheral vision while Ishido made Midoriya finish his drink. When she covered her mouth to mute her amused giggles, he noticed the melancholy in her eyes temporarily faded. He always liked it when she smiled even if he didn't understand why. It's not like it was some uncommon thing for her to do. Maybe it was because he admired her in so many ways. She was an excellent leader. In times of crisis, she had stepped up when called upon to command. There was a grace about her that was difficult to put into words, but it always inspired confidence in others. Her intelligence bordered on the supernatural. He remembered back to their provisional licensing exam where she had outwitted a girl from another school whose quirk literally boosted her IQ. And even though Shoto felt a little ashamed for it, he couldn't ignore how beautiful she was. He felt his jaw clench, internally chastising himself for thinking like that. Was it inappropriate for her appearance to be a reason he admired her? Anyone with a brain could see she was attractive, but he knew there was so much more to Momo Yaoyorozu than what was on the surface. She was someone he respected unconditionally, not an object to be lusted after. Something the matter, Todoroki? He blinked, finally realizing that she had caught him staring at her. Delicate raven eyelashes batted against cream skin as she eyed him inquisitively. He swallowed thickly and made sure the others hadn't also noticed. Thankfully they were preoccupied by Kaminari's antics. Yes. No. He sighed, adding an embarrassed chuckle. Apologies. Her lips formed a dubious smile, but she appeared to let him off the hook. The reflection of the dim lights Ishido had hung around the room danced in her onyx eyes. So tell me what's new with you? I need another Bef. Ivrine here good? After getting varying responses from her friends, Mina stood from the table and made her way to the bar. She signaled for the bartender and ordered a Moscow Mule for herself and an espresso martini for Momo. She noticed her former class VP was drinking a lot more than she usually saw from her. She wondered what the heck that was about. She rested her rosy elbows against the wooden bar top, leaning her body weight forward. A quartet of scarlet eyes to her right caught her attention. Kiri was talking to Bakugo about something she couldn't quite hear over the music, seeing as the speakers were directly above her. She intercepted his gaze, and her lips unconsciously curled into an impish grin. When he matched it, Bakugo turned to see what the hell had him smiling like a moron. Kiri never was very subtle. Mina slid down the bar so that she was just beside the explosive blonde. Nagashira wanted me to tell you to chill the EFF out. Said you were way too rough during the hostage thingy last week. She was crestfallen when he didn't respond with his usual over-the-top annoyance. It was weird, but there was something wonderfully familiar about his sour attitude. The absence of it made her heart ache. Instead, he shot her a half-hearted glare that didn't reach his red eyes. It quickly faded into a stoicism that would have looked more at home on Todoroki's face than his. F off, raccoon eyes. I shouldn't have to explain myself to our PR dipshits every time I take down a villain. Mina let out a sigh that was intentionally loud so he would hear it over the speakers. I know. That's why I defended you, dipshit. She let out a sad giggle when he looked her way again. Her frown curled a little higher when she saw Kiri peer at her over his shoulder. We can't mess around when hostages are involved. Gotta be decisive and rational. I told him that. She turned her body so that they were nose to nose and poked him in the chest. But you gotta be smarter about how you handle the press afterward. Can't have one of my partners barking at a reporter every other day. He scoffed, giving her what she had wanted this whole time. A full scowl crept across his mouth as he stood from the bar stool. TSK. Whatever. He turned and walked toward one of the high tops where Tsu and Tokoyami were. Mina smiled contently at his back and called after him. Love you cats. His shoulders visibly tensed and he stuck his hands in his pockets. The only other person left at the bar let out an amused chuckle. You two are funny. She thanked the bartender for her drink and slid down the row of stools once more, taking Bakugo's now empty seat. How so? You bicker like an old married couple sometimes. Mina snorted, waving her hand dismissively. Please. He's like my brother. She took a sip from her drink and shot him a coquettish grin. It's cute that you're jealous though. Kiri scoffed, looking away to try and hide the obvious redness forming on his cheeks. As if? She giggled playfully and leaned a little closer to him. Hey, so Doc got any plans after this? The faux redhead took a quick glance around them, not that anyone would be able to eavesdrop over the loudspeaker. UH.NOU? She shook her head, leaning in even closer so she could whisper in his ear. Nope. She popped the P, causing him to clear his throat. See you later. She very intentionally said it as a statement as opposed to a question, but he still nodded his head in response. Cool. A low, content hum escaped her as she picked up the two drinks. She parted with a wink before returning to the table to give Momo her martini. Momo was so wrapped up in pleasant conversation that she didn't even notice they were the only ones left at the table. They must have been chatting for well over an hour now. That's so incredible. You've mastered both styles in such a short amount of time. Shoto bashfully rubbed the back of his bicolored hair. When he dragged his fingers forward, the strands of red and white mixed together temporarily. I would hardly call myself a master. In fact, I'm still a relative novice at the Yamanaka style. She shook her head, dismissing his humility with an enthusiastic smile. It's so impressive. And your commitment is beyond admirable. I can't even imagine creating lacquerware with my bare hands. He chuckled, shooting her a boyish grin. Says the incredible hero who can create anything she desires. Shoto watched her bite hard into her flower petal lips. How cheeky of you, Todoroki. He internally cursed himself for saying something so bold. Oh, apologies. She dismissed his sorry with a flushed grin and a coy giggle. No apology necessary. Thank you for the compliment. But we were talking about you. You've come such a long way in such a short amount of time. I think you should be more proud of yourself. A low hum escaped his throat as he looked down at the empty bowl between them. I appreciate it, but all credit goes to my sensei. He reached out to graze his fingers over the curved wood. She taught me to respect the urushi as if it were the tree's vitality. In fact, she showed me how to extract the sap that we used for the lacquer myself. She sounds remarkable. He nodded, his unchanged expression not revealing any clues to how he felt about this mysterious and apparently female teacher. She is. I plan to take some time off in autumn so I can go back for another class. Momo wasn't currently capable of unpacking why she even cared about his teacher's gender. That's wonderful. You stayed in Kaga, right? When making Yamanaka-style bowls, yes? Did you like Ishikawa? Shoto's lips quirked up once more. I did. It was quiet and the people there were very kind. It almost felt like a place where time stood still. If that makes any sense. Momo hummed in understanding. It does. There are parts of Kyoto like that as well. I would love to see Ishikawa sometime. Shoto's mismatched eyes rose from the empty bowl to meet hers. She watched his mouth open for a moment before hesitation seemed to consume his features. It looked like he had been about to say something. Surely he wasn't about to. No, there was positively no way. Momo desperately changed the subject before the moment turned any more awkward. So, how is your family doing? What was left of his smile didn't falter, bringing her tremendous relief. She usually hesitated to ask him about his family for fear of being nosy, but liquid courage was fueling her tonight. They're good as far as I can tell. I only really see my mom and sister these days. My brother moved to Sapporo with his wife after Toya passed. He took a swig of his beer, looking out at nothing in particular. I sent them a few bowls for Christmas. They seem like they're doing well. Momo tightened the muscles in her cheeks to dismiss any pity from her smile. I'm glad to hear that. I always liked Fuyumi-san. She always liked you too. Momo hiccuped in surprise, causing Shoto to stifle a snort. Really? He nodded. Sure. Ever since high school. It meant a lot to her that you came to visit me in the hospital after Toya's broadcast. Momo felt some heat rise to her cheeks. Yes, but the others came too. As I recall, Mina, Kirishima, and Shoji were also there. Shoto nodded, looking down at his beer as if avoiding her eyes. True. But she already knew how much I admired you. As a hero, I mean. Momo thought back to their time together in high school. All of her classmates were encouraging and supportive, but there were few people who praised her as much as the man now sharing the bench with her. How about you? How are your mom and dad? She blinked out of the fond memories and thought back to her most recent phone call with her mother. Her mood took a noticeable nosedive. They're fine. His white eyebrow quirked up, unconvinced and a little concerned. She took a sip from her martini before elaborating. Don't get me wrong, I love my parents with all my heart, and I know how fortunate I am. When she paused for a few seconds, Shoto tried to catch her gaze. I sense a but. She sighed, unconsciously circling the martini glass with her index finger. But sometimes they have a tendency to expect too much from me, especially my mother. Lately, she's been so insistent that I try and meet someone. Meet someone? Do you mean like dating? The redness on her nose darkened a little. Yes. She's attempted to set me up a few times now. Why? She tilted her head curiously. That was a rather vague question. What do you mean? Why are they pressuring you so much to date? Shouldn't that be your choice? Momo wanted to hug Todoroki for saying exactly what she had been telling her parents for the past few years. She resisted the urge by clasping her hands together on her lap. Well, it's no secret that my family is quite wealthy, and I'm an only child. The line of inheritance has always been important to the Yaoyorosis. Sometimes I think that they want to make sure that their legacy is secured. A legacy? You mean like? The word kids hung suspended above their table. Momo cleared her throat and lifted her martini glass to her lips to finish her drink. Yes. And before that would come marriage, obviously, so they're insistent I start exploring my options. Sounds controlling. No offense. Momo nodded in agreement, and they exchanged bitter smiles. She wasn't sure why, but talking with him like this was the most relaxed she had felt in weeks. Had she just missed him? Or was it the alcohol? Do you ever think about things like that, Todoroki? His right eyebrow quirked up again. Like marriage? Yes. And legacy. Before she could apologize for blurting out such an invasive question, he spoke up. I don't know. My own views on marriage and relationships are admittedly sort of warped. And after my upbringing, I'm not sure I could ever imagine myself as a father. He clicked his tongue as his lips pulled south into a frown. Apologies for saying something so depressing. She shook her head adamantly. Not at all. Don't worry about it. It was my fault for asking such a personal question. He shrugged, his expression softening a bit. I don't really mind. We're friends, right? Her heart warmed. Of course we are. She giggled to herself as a distant memory was suddenly triggered. You know, Todoroki, you left quite the impression on my parents after our graduation ceremony. Do you remember meeting them? I do. It was outside the auditorium, right? She hummed affirmatively. He thought back to his final day as a UA student. All of our classmates and their families were mingling before we all went out to dinner together. Your dad and I discussed all the different types of tea you'd made for us over the years. He talked about the extravagant tea parties you would throw for all your stuffed animals when you were younger. And I told him about the study sessions you used to host in the common area. Shoto thought back to his own childhood. He had never played pretend or conjured any imaginary friends. He didn't play with dolls or action figures or even video games. He wasn't afforded such frivolities. Enji Todoroki had made sure of that. Ugh, father can be so embarrassing sometimes. Momo sighed, picking up her glass before realizing it was empty. He didn't seem to notice and continued. And I remember your mom asking me about my plans for the future. When I told her I didn't have any besides being a hero, she explained to me the importance of having what she called a roadmap to success. She let out a dramatic groan that was reminiscent of Ishido. At least I'm not the only one she badgers. Momo's overactive mind reached a tipping point. Her frustration was so overwhelming that she didn't bother to filter what was about to come out of her mouth. Perhaps she would stop pestering me if I just married you. The party around them seemed to deafen until no sound was present other than a strange throbbing in Shoto's ears. Their friends' voices faded away into a devastatingly uncomfortable silence. His eyes snapped to hers just in time to see them slowly begin to widen with realization. The blush on her ears and nose expanded to the rest of her face. It almost looked painful how red she was. His brain defaulted to the assumption that she had been kidding, despite how out of character it would be for her to make such an unbelievably forward joke. With that theory dismissed, he considered that maybe she was flirting with him? The look on her face now certainly was different from when admirers and fans would try to get his attention. So if it wasn't a joke and she wasn't flirting with him? Oh, are you? She took a glance around as if to check and make sure no one else had heard her unexpected suggestion. When her shaky eyes came back to find his once more, her brow knitted together in a regretful expression that made him feel inexplicable sorrow. Her lips parted to make a noise that she had never made before, a discomposed, girlish stutter that was so unlike Momo Yaoyorozu. My. Bonsoir, Miss Amos. The two former recommendation students jumped in surprise, finally breaking out of their compromising moment. They turned simultaneously to see Yuga Aoyama had burst through the door to the private room. Their peers had quickly surrounded him in greetings, with Toru the first to give her sidekick a welcoming hug. Shoto cleared his hoarse throat and nodded toward their former classmate. I should go say hello. Momo was far too embarrassed to look back into his eyes. Instead, she straightened herself up and stood from the table, ignoring an all-consuming dizziness that had absolutely nothing to do with the alcohol in her system. Alright. I should too. Ijiro arrived home rather late after walking Ciro's drunkashome. His apartment was relatively close to where the party venue had been, so he had to go significantly out of his way for his inebriated friend. He would have considered driving them both back to Ciro's place in his car, but he hadn't stayed completely sober himself. It would be incredibly unmanly to drink and drive, especially without a license. When he reached the door of his apartment, he was a little surprised to find it unlocked. A small grin tugged at his lips. She had said she would see him later. He opened the door and removed his shoes in the entryway, placing them next to a pair of magenta sneakers. The sounds of punching, kicking, and characters shouting signature attacks could be heard coming from around the corner. He walked down the hallway to find she had made herself at home. Hey. Hi. Mina was sitting on his couch with her legs crossed underneath her, still wearing the outfit she had worn to Toru's party. She was vigorously mashing buttons on the white controller in her grasp while keeping her eyes on the screen, not even sparing him a glance now that he had arrived. Sorry I took so long. It's cool. Ciro all good? I had to drag him 3 kilometers back to his place. Mina snorted, finally shooting him a sympathetic smile. You're a great friend, babe. The sound of her character shrieking in pain caused her to look back at the screen. Dang it. He chuckled as he hung his keys on the small hook mounted on the wall. The spare set he had made for her was hanging on a second hook just beside it. Sorry. Did I make you lose? Kinda. But no big. She grinned thoughtlessly. Wanna go a few rounds? Ijiro raised an eyebrow, prompting her to snort. She held the controller out in his direction. In the game, silly? He blushed, a little embarrassed that his unchivalrous thoughts had won out. He stretched his hands above his head, letting out a tired groan. I'm pretty beat and kinda grimy after carrying him home. I think I'm gonna grab a shower and hit the hay if that's cool. Mina smiled thoughtlessly, shrugging her shoulders. No worries. I'm gonna play for a little while longer. Sounds good. He walked past the living space and toward the bedroom. Before he reached the door, he turned around and blurted out what he had been holding in since the party. Hey, that double date Ciro mentioned earlier. I turned it down, just so you know. Mina hummed indifferently as she navigated the game's character selection screen. "'Kay." Another chuckle escaped him, followed by a relieved exhale. He wasn't sure why he had felt compelled to explain himself. It's not like he owed her anything. Cool. Good night. Night, Kiri. Ijiro excused himself to go clean up, doing his best not to overthink their brief exchange. He had made himself look like a fool for misunderstanding her double entendre. Luckily, she was the type of person to laugh off awkward moments like that. He couldn't even remember the last time he had seen her flustered or embarrassed. Once he was squeaky clean and towel-dried, Ijiro threw on a pair of briefs and a tank top and crawled into his bed. He set his alarm so they could go work out tomorrow morning, knowing full well he would have to drag her out of bed as per usual. She'd be able to get more of the beauty rest she was always going on about if she didn't stay up late gaming so much. He turned out the bedroom light with an app she had installed on his phone. Smart home technology had never been something he had been interested in, but she had been so excited to show him how cool it could be. She was a lot nerdier than she let on. He had to give it to her that it certainly made mundane things more convenient. He rolled over onto his side and shut his eyes to finally end his long day. A few minutes after he shut the lights off, he heard the bedroom door creak open. Her voice came out in a hushed whisper. "It's just me if you're still awake." Ijiro held up his hand to give her a thumbs up, causing her to giggle. He heard the sounds of the door being shut, his dresser drawer being reopened, and the rustling of clothes coming from the foot of the bed. Even after so many nights like this one, the fact that she was undressing in his bedroom still made his heart speed up a bit. He thought back to the day they started this, how free-spirited and unbothered she was by changing around him. Her nonchalant nature was comforting in a strange way. It definitely made him less nervous. The bed shifted as she crawled in to take the spot behind him. Soft arms wrapped around his torso, and a content sigh filled his left ear. He turned over onto his back, allowing her bare legs to tangle with his as she snuggled close. "You have fun tonight?" He hummed affirmatively. "Yeah. You did an awesome job with the party. Everyone had a great time." She purred happily when he draped an arm under her shoulders. She had picked out one of his oversized t-shirts to wear. "Thanks." He shut his eyes, enjoying this rare moment of total peace in this chaotic life he led. Nights like this one had become a regular occurrence, but he still made a point to pause and cherish them, knowing they probably wouldn't last forever. "Hey, Kiri?" His eyes blinked back open and he looked down. In the darkness of his bedroom, her otherworldly citron eyes shined like two bright stars. "You know I wouldn't mind if you went on that double date, right?" Her lopsided grin held a hint of guilt. "I don't want you to feel like you can't do things like that 'cause of this." What she had just said had made him feel strangely down, but he forced a meek smile to match hers and nodded his head. "I know. I didn't want to go anyway though. Sorry for being kinda weird about it when I got home." She shook her head and shut her eyes, placing a kiss on the collar of his t-shirt. "Don't sweat it, babe. I'm glad we can talk stuff out whenever we need to." His lips twitched higher. "Me too." He craned his neck to kiss her left horn, causing her to giggle happily. When his head rested back against the pillow, he once again considered the odd relationship they had found themselves in. Mina had been sleeping at his place a few nights a week for almost 8 months now. It all started one evening when they had gone out for drinks on his birthday and he had a few too many. She had walked him home and spent the night on his couch. The next morning he woke up to breakfast in bed, making the gnarly hangover a little more manageable. They both had the day off, so they spent it hanging out, lounging around on the couch and playing video games. He wasn't super into gaming, but she opened his eyes to more narrative-based single-player ones that he now adored. When she eventually left to go home, he told her to come by any time. He didn't think she would take his invite seriously, until she showed up at his door the next afternoon with takeout and a new game. They hung out well into the night, and he offered to walk her home when they both were showing signs of exhaustion. After some thought, she proposed that she just spend the night again. When it came time for them to sleep, he had suggested that he could sleep on the couch while she took the bedroom. She rebuked his offer with a dismissal wave and told him she was down to share. He questioned whether or not that was the manly thing to do, but she argued they were adults now and a little cuddling never hurt anyone. He was stunned when she showed up regularly, making herself more and more at home with each visit. On the 5th night, when they were lying in bed, she casually asked him if he wanted to make out. At first, he thought she was just messing with him, especially from the way she howled with laughter at his flabbergasted reaction. But once she was done cracking up, she told him she was serious. When he finally put together the words to ask her why she would want to, she shrugged and said she always wondered if he would be a good kisser. Little did she know it would be his first kiss. Again, he didn't think it was a good idea at the time, but he had a very hard time saying no for whatever reason. Mina was his best friend other than maybe Bakugo, but he would be lying if he said he didn't find her attractive. I mean, come on, look at her. They made out again the next time she slept over, leading to some innocent dry humping. That slowly evolved into hand stuff as the calendar pages turned. After about 2 months had passed, she had no problem being open about when she wanted to fool around. They had yet to take their physical relationship any further than that though. It was almost as though there was an imaginary line between the sheets that they were both hesitant to cross. There was an unspoken fear that if they did, it might complicate their friendship. That was the last thing he wanted. On most nights she would just come over to hang out. Her bubbly presence brought vibrance to his otherwise dull den of manliness, so he was more than happy to share his living space with her as much as she wanted. And when all might passed away, they leaned on each other to get through their grief. Ijiro had wanted to be there for her, but he was surprised to find that the opposite ended up happening. Her warmth and affection got him through one of the darkest times in his adult life. Just a month after the funeral, he ended up giving her a spare key to the apartment so she could come whenever she felt like it. Since then, they had been in this sort of relationship purgatory. They were still just friends and no one else was aware of their unspoken arrangement as far as he knew. They were co-workers, running the agency together alongside Bakugo and the newly unretired Midoriya. But when she was here at night, she sort of felt like his girlfriend. He wasn't totally sure how to feel about that though. This newfound physical attraction for her hadn't really started until she started sleeping in his bed. and her carefree nature made this little situationship of theirs seem far from romantic. He had known Mina for over a decade now, and he loved her to death, but his affection for her had always been more about pride than lust. Since they were middle schoolers, she had been the person he looked up to most who was actually present in his life. She had always been his hero. Ijiro blinked out of his thoughts when his bunkmate let out a melodramatic groan against his sternum. I just remembered I've got a big meeting tomorrow that I gotta lead. Cats'll be on patrol and you're off, right? Yeah. Who with? That one guy from the community center. They want to tap some of our sidekicks for this local outreach initiative. It's a sick opportunity. I really don't want to screw it up. He thought about offering to come in to support her, but he knew that would sound patronizing. Instead, he did for her what she always did for him when he was doubting himself. Sounds awesome. The agency's in great hands. You always crush those meetings. When she didn't respond right away, he considered he maybe should have offered to back her up in person. She shifted, pressing her hand against his chest to push herself up. You know, if you want I could always... He trailed off when she leaned forward until her nose was hovering just millimeters above his. Ishido? You well? She silenced him by pressing her strawberry lips against his. His eyes reflexively closed, and his hands found themselves on her lower back. All of the breath was pulled from his lungs when she cupped the side of his face. Each and every time she kissed him, it was like getting lost in the esoteric tranquility of outer space. She broke the lip lock after a few seconds with a soft pop, keeping her forehead resting against his. Thanks, Ijiro, for being the sweetest guy I've ever met. And, for always believing in me even when I don't believe in myself. His lips curled into a smile just before she kissed him again. A strange warmth filled his soul that he had only experienced a few times in his life, all of which involved the pink girl looking down at him. Always horn buddy? She sighed contently and slid her body down to rest her cheek against his chest. Night, babe. Yeah. Sleep tight. He caressed his fingers up and down her spine in a lazy rhythm until he felt her soft snores. As he lay there, cozied up in his bed with his oldest friend, Ijiro Kirishima began to realize something that he had been trying to ignore for far too long. There had been a clear reason he turned down the double date. He wasn't interested in being set up with a random girl who he didn't know. Not because he wasn't interested in finding a partner, but because he already had someone who he had feelings for. He could try to deny the fact that coming home after a long shift to find her already in his apartment was the best part of his day. He could lie to himself and reason that he just saw her as a friend and nothing more. He could use the nonsensical excuse that it wouldn't be very manly to be involved romantically with a coworker, even though they were regularly hooking up already and sharing a bed more often than not. He could offer every rebuttal in the world, but his true feelings were undeniable. Ijiro was violently ripped out of his thoughts when an errant knee rose up to connect with his groin. He let out a pained chuckle, thankful she had narrowly missed anything too delicate. She shifted around in her sleep so often that he had woken up with her feet in his face, more than once. Goofy quirks like her restless sleeping habits were what made Mina Ishido. She was the self-dubbed acid master with yellow horns, pink skin and a gorgeous smile. She was the drill sergeant dance instructor. She was the cheery party planner who always ensured everyone was having a great time. She was the blunt colleague who would tell it to you straight when you screwed up, and she was the fierce friend who would get angry or cry for you when someone did you wrong. But above all else, she was the brave hero who would do anything to protect those she cared about. These little idiosyncrasies defined her as a person. To the uninitiated, she may seem doltish or loud or bossy or extra. But to her closest friends and to Ijiro, they were the traits that made her so endearing. They were the things that he loved about her. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. I hope you found it as intriguing and thought-provoking as we did. A big shout out to One For All for crafting such a compelling story. Don't forget to check out their profile on Archive of Our Own for more amazing works. The link is in the description below. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to What If Deku 2.0 for more fascinating explorations into the world of fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we're always excited to hear your thoughts and suggestions in the comments section. See you guys in the next video.